Okay, so let's talk about what is addiction. Addiction is a brain illness or a brain disease. And this is defined by two medical bodies in particular. NIDA, the National Institute of Drug Abuse in America, so that's the US State Health Department, and ASAM, the American Society of Addiction Medicine. Addiction is a primary illness, which means it has one cause, and in particular that is a malfunctioning reward system in the midbrain, a malfunctioning memory circuit also in the midbrain, and impaired reasoning faculties in the forebrain. Addiction is a chronic illness as opposed to an acute illness, which effectively means that there's no cure, but there is treatment. So diabetes is a good analogy to use here. But like diabetes, somebody suffering from addiction could look quite healthy to an onlooker. They could be quite well balanced emotionally, psychologically and physically. But if they don't treat it, then the symptoms will progress. So let's look at it in a bit more detail. Addiction is effectively a disease which is affecting reward chemistry in the midbrain. 40 to 60% of people are born with this, which means they'll have certain symptoms. Because dopamine in their midbrain is malfunctioning, dopamine is the brain chemical that controls reward and pleasure, because that's malfunctioning, they will exhibit symptoms that reflect that. So they will have a blunted pleasure response to life. They will experience mind-crushing boredom, the like of which ordinary people don't experience, and they will have feelings of a lack of meaning and purpose in their lives. Even if they do have meaning in their life, they won't feel that they do. So when an addict gets to perhaps their teenage years or early adulthood, they'll be feeling quite sick with these symptoms. And then they will probably find, almost certainly find, dopamine reinforcers in their environment. So what are they? Dopamine reinforcers are anything which strongly boost dopamine tone in the midbrain and spike dopamine levels up very, very quickly. And they are, of course, drugs, alcohol, compulsive sex, and overeating. So people suffering from this illness feel very sick, and then they find a dopamine reinforcer, and then they have something of a eureka moment where they have effectively discovered their medicine, or so they think. So many addicts will tell you that this is where they felt they could first work the room or socialise, or like their life had some colour in it. So the reward system, having found its medicine, will then send a very strong message to the memory system, which will say, remember to do this behaviour in future. Never forget that this is your medicine. And in a sense, the addict's brain is trying to help the addict here to achieve homeostasis, to use a medical term, or balance. So in the same way that when we're cold, we'll shiver to warm up, or if we're hot, we'll sweat to cool down, the addict is experiencing symptoms of poor pleasure response to life. They will reach balance when they find these dopamine reinforcers. So very important for the memory system to remember to do it. Then once the memory system has understood this, it will send a message to the reasoning system in the front of the brain, which controls judgment and decision making and things like that. And it will say, with regard to these dopamine reinforcers, you've got permission to turn off your sensible decisions and exhibit poor judgment and do anything that you need to do to get these drugs and alcohol. And again, the addict's brain thinks that it's helping the addict. But of course, as this circuit becomes more and more pronounced and gets faster and faster, the addict's decision making gets worse and worse and worse. So that in a nutshell is what addiction is. So let's summarise it. It's a chronic brain illness. It's primary, it always has one cause, which is a poorly functioning reward, memory and reasoning circuit. It involves the compulsive pursuit of dopamine reinforcers, which is a posh way of saying drugs, alcohol, sex and overeating and other things. It displays very certain symptoms like blunted pleasure response, extreme boredom and feelings of poor meaning and purpose. And this brain circuit, the reward, memory and reasoning circuit, will start to go down and down and down until the addict is in a very poor state indeed, and then of course they will have to seek treatment and ideally they will need to abstain.